Hi, welcome to Bourbon Turntable. This is a show where we blend the love of music with the love of whiskey. My name is Kevin Rose, and I'm here with Benjamin Eves and Drew Crawley. Guys, how are we doing tonight?
Hey, good evening. Doing good.
Yeah, doing
Good.
fantastic.
Good. Hey, now, on the last show, we talked about the fact that both of you, I'm the boring one. I'm not out doing these incredible adventures, but you guys have had some really spectacular weeks the last couple weeks. And Ben, we talked about you last week, last show, and the trip that you made to Texas and Colorado. And that was fantastic. If you missed that, tune in to go back and find last week's show, and you'll really enjoy hearing about that. But Drew, you got to do something really fun yourself. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. All right. Well, back at the end of August and the 1st of September, I got to spend a little time recording an EP. So I have been working, in the cell phone industry by day and music by night for a while now. And that balance is probably going to stay intact. But I've had the opportunity to work with some really, really great people, make some really cool connections. So I got to spend a few days down in Nashville working with a tremendously gifted group of musicians, some engineers, and working out of a studio down there called Gnome to record about 6 songs. And so they're all songs that I've written and been playing out and about here in Louisville for a minute. But Kevin, you got to come down to the studio for a day and a half, and one of our other good friends from the bourbon world, Mark, got to come as well. So it was just a tremendously rewarding process. At the risk of getting way too personal, a lot of the stuff that I have been working on comes from dealing with a lot of fallout from personal life as far as the subject matter of songwriting, and to get to see all of that hurt and just tough things that life has to offer get turned into something meaningful, at least to me, and then to have some of the closest and most meaningful people in my life be there, especially that last day when we were getting to listen back to it all, being surrounded by you guys, and some of that was just so special. So I loved every second of that experience. Hopefully there will be a part of that everybody can hear before the year is out. And then early in 2022, we'll be launching that across multiple platforms. And I got some really, really cool stuff that will be coming along with that. I can't talk about that too much more, but I'm really excited to see what happens with that project.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun to hang out, and I appreciate you indulging us. Well, me, because I didn't do anything. Mark actually played some drums for you on one track, but it was fun to be there and see what you're doing, and really excited for you and what is in store for you with that, and hope it takes you to and accomplishes whatever you want it to. So it's very good stuff.
Super excited for you, Drew. Seriously.
Thanks.
I can't wait to hear how this turns out.
Well, coming up here in a little bit, we are going to be talking about Van Halen. And the day that this show will air, October 6th, it will be the 1-year anniversary of Eddie's passing. So we want to honor him and his music in that tonight. So, but before we get into that, we're going to drink a little Jack Daniels. And anybody want to offer up why that's significant to Van Halen?
Go for it.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
If you Google Van Halen and Jack Daniels, you'll find no shortage of photographs of members of the band chugging bottles of Old Number 7. And then Michael Anthony had a bass guitar made in the form of a Jack Daniels bottle. So, so that's the connection between Jack and Van Halen. So, but everybody's got a different expression of Jack Daniels tonight. I don't think anybody is breaking out Old Number 7. And thank you for that. I think everybody's kind of knows what they're into there. But Ben, why don't you share with everybody what you're sipping on?
I have been a big fan for a while since it came out. The single barrel proof, little gold label edition, fancy bottle. I think it really showcases the potential of what is there at Jack Daniel's, what they do in those individual barrels. The flavors are phenomenal. It's got that classic Brown-Forman profile to it, but I think it's an absolute gem. Being in the whiskey review and in YouTube business here, you hear a lot of people reviewing, and it gets brought up ever so often, but I still almost consider this one like still slightly under the radar a little bit. A lot of people that I encounter just don't realize, hey, Jack Daniel's makes single barrels. They make these barrel proof, and the flavors. I mean, there's so much going on. There's just a lot of depth, a lot of character that's in there that you would not expect from the label Jack Daniel's. And it's a fantastic sipper, and I think a great price for a single barrel proof whiskey in today's bourbon world. So, and yeah, I said it, bourbon. Throw that out there.
Oh, well, we may have a disagreement on our hands. Drew, what do you got?
All right, so I have got a Jack single barrel as well. This is the single barrel select. This came to me by way of Old Town Liquors here in Louisville. One of the more preeminent single barrel picking stores here in town. So this one is the 94 proof Expression. Picked this up in late March. I like this one as far as approachability, especially on these nights where, at least for me, when we're recording, this is the end of a long birthday weekend. So I need something a little gentler than the barrel proof Expression as we're winding down the evening. This one suits that just fine. Just like Ben said, though, classic Brown-Forman. You've got the toffee, you've got the banana, got a little bit of that nuttiness, almost a hazelnut is what I'm picking up on that. And then that back end is just all that sweet, sweet honey. The other thing I love about, the Lincoln County process and all that kind of stuff, you get a viscosity. You get a lot of those oils, all that kind of stuff. But you don't get completely just washed away, watered down finish. There's still something to that. And I really enjoy this one. It's not necessarily my everyday go-to, but when the time is right, it is just the perfect whiskey.
Yeah. Well, I am going with a product called Tennessee Tasters, and they have a variety of offerings that Jack Daniel's produces that are only available in Tennessee. At least that's my understanding of it. And the one I've got a barrel proof rye, which is what I'm starting with, and then I've got a high Angel Share barrels. And the barrel proof rye comes in at 127.6, and the high Angel Share comes in at 107. So they're really great. If you get the opportunity to pass through Tennessee or go to the distillery, you see these on the shelf, pick them up. They're well worth your while and a worthy addition to your bourbon collection, your whiskey collection, whatever the case may be. And so all right, Ben, you brought it up. Is Jack Daniel's bourbon or not? It's the tale as old as time in bourbon groups and online chatter and people talking around bars. Is Jack Daniel's bourbon?
Going by some of the so-called whiskey experts that I've read and I've seen their breakdown of it, I would tend to put Jack Daniel's in a bourbon category. Yep.
So then you're saying the highest selling bourbon in the world comes out of Lynchburg, Tennessee. You just made a lot of people in Kentucky mad.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Hey, I've got to throw one vote on top of that. If it's bourbon, except it goes through one extra step in the process. Right. So if we're going to consider Angel's Envy, and all these others, straight bourbon whiskeys, Jack meets every single one of those criteria from a legal standpoint, federally, for sure. You can market it however you want, but as far as the federal TTB is concerned, that is a bourbon whiskey.
And that for me is where it rests. If we're going to legally define spirits and the legal definition, and it checks all the boxes, and that's what they're calling it.
Yeah. See, I'm not
you're
so
from
sure.
Tennessee,
Right.
You have opinions about that.
To me, I would argue that some of the things that we call bourbon don't necessarily meet those definitions either, because of those additional processes that you've mentioned. And I think Jack Daniel's kind of falls into that category. It's not anything worth losing any sleep over or any friendships over, but I think that's happened before. But they don't want to be called bourbon. You know, they meet all those. Even if you agree, okay, they meet all the classifications, they don't want to be called bourbon. You look at somebody like Chattanooga whiskey; they don't have that additional process. They do meet all the requirements clearly, without any question, to be called a bourbon. But they don't want to be called a bourbon; they want to be called a whiskey.
Right.
And I think that's just to differentiate themselves from the bourbon world and what's going on to them north of the border. So
I will say this. I have a special place in my heart for Jack Daniel's regardless, because that's where my whole whiskey journey began, was taking a tour of that distillery about going on almost 17 years ago.
Yep.
So that started the journey for me, and for that I'm deeply appreciative. So
well, but I just took a sip of this barrel proof rye, and it's pretty hot.
Yeah.
But it's really good. They've made a really good rye out of it. It is 70% rye, 18% corn, 12% malted barley. So again, if you have the opportunity, I'd highly recommend it.
Yeah, that's the same thing for this barrel proof. If you're a big fan of, at least out of this particular bottle, and a lot of the bottles I've had before that are kind of follow the same vein a little bit. If you're a big fan of big wood notes in your bourbon and your whiskey, this one hits it. There's toasted oak, there's cedar, there's sassafras. I mean, I feel like I'm at a sawmill where they're just turning out all kinds of different boards, just all these different notes going through. It's a fantastic little journey.
Yeah. Okay, so where does Old Number 7 live in your life?
High school.
Okay, allegedly,
allegedly, right?
Right. Yep. Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I almost never reach for that one to sit neat. It's hey, we're out for the night. If I don't have sugar-free Red Bull available, a Jack and Coke will do just fine. I kind of think of Old Number 7 as a whiskey of function more than a profile. It's there to get the job done. It does what it's supposed to do, at least for me.
Yeah, there's been plenty of times I've been at a wedding or something like that, and they have a little bar, and there's Dewar's, and there's Jack, and I'm like, just give me a Jack and Coke.
Yep.
Good to go.
Yeah. It serves its purpose.
Right.
And is, tremendously popular around the world. So it's hard to argue with that too much, and be too snooty about it.
Right.
Don't want to be bougie. But anyway, anything else on Jack Daniel's? Any other thoughts? Anything else you'd recommend?
Well, that Heritage Barrel is pretty fantastic, but the way the allocation game is played and the pricing on that has gone up. And then they're releasing 10-year-old?
Mm-hmm.
Now they're coming out.
Just announced that. Yeah.
Yep. They have a new head distiller. So I'm kind of excited to see what direction things are going to go.
Yeah, I think it's the first Jack Daniel's product that's had an age statement on it.
Right.
Is that
exactly
correct?
Right? That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. So that'll be fun.
Yep.
That'll be something else we won't be able to get.
More than likely.
But who knows? Maybe we'll get lucky. All right. So side A of the show is running out here. We're going to take a quick break. We'll flip the show over and get to side B, and we'll talk a little bit about Van Halen. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about Bourbon on the Banks. Bourbon on the Banks is a whiskey festival, technically a bourbon festival, but I'm sure they have whiskey there too. I don't know that Jack Daniels will be there, or if we'll have to have that debate with anything represented at Bourbon on the Banks. But Bourbon on the Banks is a festival in Frankfort, Kentucky, and it is Friday, October 22nd and Saturday, October 23rd. On the 22nd in the evening, they have a VIP reception where they have some rare and vintage and special bottles that will be part of an auction, and that is a ticketed event. But there's also an event, a couple events that have free access. The Bourbon Street on Broadway. They have they'll have food trucks set up. They'll have live music there. They'll have and whiskey and cocktails to drink. Then on the 23rd is the actual Bourbon on the Banks Festival, where they'll have 40 plus distilleries on hand, where you'll be able to sample things from those distilleries. Again, they'll have food, they'll have live music, and then they've got an after party at Goodwood, which again is more live music, more food, and more cocktails and whiskey. This kind of sounds like it's right up our alley, guys.
Mm-hmm.
So bourbononthebanks.org for more information. You can buy your tickets there as well, and hopefully we will see you there. So now we will go on to side B of the show, where we will talk a little bit about Van Halen.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, I've got to admit, early on, I did not like Van Halen. Didn't like him one bit. And it was a very personal reason. And that personal reason revolved around Valerie Bertinelli. To see, as a young man of probably 12 years old, Valerie Bertinelli was on a show called One Day at a Time, and she was my first celebrity crush. I mean, look at her. She's adorable. She's just adorable. And Eddie Van Halen simply was not good enough for Valerie Bertinelli. And so I didn't, it was a conscious decision when I was really young that I was not going to like Van Halen. Now, you know, I reconciled with Eddie and the band, and came to be real big fans. But initially, I did not care for Van Halen one bit. So that's my personal Van Halen story. that Eddie never, of course, never heard anything about, and Valerie, she never returned any of my fan letters, so it's kind of disappointing. But
I just feel the heartbreak from here.
Well, I'm over it now. That's been
you sure about that, Kevin?
That's been a year or two. I think I'm okay. But Eddie and his brother Alex were born into a musical family. And Eddie started playing the piano when he was really, really young. And initially, Eddie played the drums and Alex played the guitar. And how differently would that have been had that change never happened?
Right.
But they eventually switched instruments. And they had a string of bands that played, school functions and backyard parties and stuff. One band was called the Broken Combs. Another was called the Trojan Rubber Company. Nothing subtle about that. then they briefly changed their name to Genesis, and then they figured out there was already a band called Genesis. And
Didn't
then
know that.
then they changed their name to Mammoth, and the band was Mammoth for a while. And while every time they performed, they had to rent some sound equipment from another guy that had a band. It was in a band locally named David Lee Roth, and apparently Diamond Dave, who was not Diamond Dave back then, had auditioned to be the lead singer for Mammoth several times and failed miserably. But in a moment of being economically prudent, they decided if they let him in the band, they wouldn't have to rent his equipment anymore. So that's how David Lee Roth got into Mammoth, which shortly after that became known as Van Halen.
Love it.
So that's a little of the deep background of Van Halen. And here's a photo of the guys. I don't know if this is an episode of My Whiskey Den, or if they're or if they're trying to sell us Dave and Dean coffee. But
where's Kelly Tennille when you need her?
Well, she'll love this episode, won't she? But those are the guys. So what are your thoughts on Van Halen? Here's a list of their
for me, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there. This is a band I, again, came to much later in life, just because of my upbringing and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But I distinctly remember a couple of nights in late high school, junior year, I had a buddy that had just gotten broken up with, and in Oklahoma, there's not a lot to do except drive around back roads after a breakup, and do fun things, party in fields and all that kind of stuff. But I remember this buddy in particular was really kind of going through it, and the one song he really wanted to hear was Panama by Van Halen. And so I remember driving in the pickup truck that I owned at the time with 2 buddies in the front and 4 guys in the back seat with allegedly, again, a case of Bud Light, rocking Panama over and over and over again until 3, 4 in the morning. Until we decided it was time to call it a night. So that was my first introduction to Van Halen. And then as I started to play guitar more seriously, you start to hear, okay, who is this person influenced by? And countless guitarists that I knew and respected listed Eddie Van Halen on that list.
Right.
And so then you start to kind of hear more and more about this band. Really, really groundbreaking in a lot of ways. And then a little bit of a tie-in with our previous episode. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Eddie played the guitar solo in the Michael Jackson song "Beat It."
Beat It.
Is that correct? Yeah.
Yep.
That's right.
So you start to hear all those connections, and then kind of for folks my age and a little bit younger, now his son Wolfgang is putting out some incredible music. He joined the band, I believe, in 2017 as the bass player, and is now gone on to put out some incredible music of his own. So that legacy runs through that family. You mentioned the the musical family that's continuing on. I love that record, the Wolfgang Van Halen record. So I've just kind of appreciated it, not as much of a super fan, but just appreciating the legacy of that and the talent of that, and then some personal memories as well.
Ben, what was your introduction to Van Halen?
So for me, it's kind of like Drew, because of my family situation. That Van Halen was sort of off limits early on, so I had to kind of stumble across it as I got along a little later in life. Now, obviously, you'd hear songs in passing on the radio or something, but I remember the first time going over to a friend's house and the MTV's on and seeing the video for Hot for Teacher, and just okay, the visuals are amazing. Obviously, as a young guy, but the music and just the character of David Lee Roth. Oh my gosh! But starting to pick up from there and get into the late 80s and to the Hagar era. So this is when my life in music is really beginning to pick up and roll along. It's like, all right, Van Halen, now it's time to go back and really start to dig into these guys. And like Drew said, just the influence that they had and that Eddie had on musicians and guitarists, and not just his playing, but, he had this whole thing called the Brown sound. And I pretty much bet a penny to a dollar, every single modeling amp you ever go and try to buy, if you get a digital amp, it's going to have a model of his Brown sound on there.
I've got one sitting right there. It's just out of camera range, but yes.
Everybody was trying to emulate that sound, from what they were doing with their pickups and their guitars to how they're tweaking their amps and everything. It was, I've got to sound like Eddie Van Halen. And he had this signature sound, which, he started playing with the Les Paul. And then he, obviously, the Frankenstrat that he designed and built and threw together from really almost junk, basically, that turned into become like his signature guitar. So,
and the whole tapping technique.
The double tap technique. I mean, if that was like your rite of passage, you learned to play Eruption, and
yes,
which was literally just a warm up, and as everybody pretty much knows him, that was his warm up, but then it became to be this huge thing. So
if you look at the history of their albums, interestingly enough, before they recorded the Van Halen album in '78, they did a demo for Gene Simmons that never saw the light of day. But a lot of the songs, some of the songs off that demo made it onto Van Halen 2. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Cool. But we look at what they were doing. 78 came out with their first album. Again, we talked about debut albums a few weeks ago, and that certainly was a candidate. Then 79, Van Halen 2, and 80, Women and Children First, 81, Fair Warning, 82, Diver Down. And they were basically touring nonstop and taking 2 weeks off to record an album.
Right.
And, to me, the first Van Halen record is a classic. I think it's tremendous. But I think if you go through the list of the others, from 79 to 82, there's some great songs on there.
Right.
But in terms of strength as an album, I don't know that they really match the debut album. And then they took a little bit of time off before they came back with 1984. And I think that is an incredibly strong record.
Right.
Now you started getting away from just the guitar sound, and Eddie started bringing keyboards in a little bit in the Fair Warning album, a little bit more in Diver Down, and then 1984 it's full on. It's got as much keyboards as it does anything.
Right.
Their first. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and that Eddie was playing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely.
Known as a guitarist, but he was phenomenal, with the keyboards and the creativity with that as well.
Yeah.
That's that famous story about Jump, is that he would play the keyboard solo and the guitar solo back to back by himself.
Right.
It's impressive as all get out.
Yeah. 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 Jump is their only number one song. Mm-hmm. But it's one of my least favorite of their hits. I don't know if you guys ever experienced this or not, but we lived in a small town in Tennessee, and we would, for a while, and when we would go to the local college for basketball games, there was just like almost, once a week, there would be some local elementary school jump rope team that would come out during halftime, and they would jump rope to jump.
Right.
And so I've kind of gotten a bad association with that song. I don't think it's that great of a song anyway, but that doesn't help.
Right. I get it. I'm kind of the same way. That was their most commercially successful, and it's also probably out of all their hits, one of my least favorite.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a similar association is when I was, sixth, seventh grade. I'm in Baltimore, and we do this field trip to the local Philharmonic, and they decide to wrap up the show with playing all the classical, and then all of a sudden they break out some U2 and they play Van Halen's Jump, I guess thinking they're going to impress all the little school kids. And as soon as I heard that, it was just like, nah, I can't do that song no more. You just ruined it for me.
Yeah. Yeah. But
you're telling me a cello can imitate Eddie Van Halen? What are you? Come on,
now I have seen some phenomenal performances from people on, doing some string quartets and stuff like that, playing some AC/DC and whatnot, and it's amazing. But that one, that didn't do it for me.
Now you talk about AC/DC and the influence of Eddie Van Halen. I mean, this may be a hot take, and I could be completely off base here, so correct me if I'm wrong. But I've always kind of had the impression that Angus Young wants to be Eddie Van Halen when he grows up. You can literally hear the distinct ripoff in terms of technique between Eruption and Thunderstruck. If you just talk about the tap techniques and all that kind of stuff, that is directly Eddie Van Halen. And Angus Young is an incredible guitarist. AC/DC has their place, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for sure. But just circling back around to that conversation of his influence, a lot of people wanted to do what he was doing. He was the first to do it.
Let's see. Thunderstruck came out in 1980.
Yeah.
Eruption would have come out in
So it was before.
78.
Yeah, I was say 78, I think. So that.
Yeah, 78. So it had to beat by a couple of years.
Right.
And kind of took the world by storm when it did. But I'm not going to give demerits to AC/DC or Angus Young for that. But that's a good conversation for another day, though. I like the thought.
Since we're doing hot takes about Jack Daniels already, I figured I'd just lob a grenade out there. Might as well cause some chaos.
Okay, well,
I'm curious because that's a theory of thought I've never heard anybody say before. So is that a hot topic in conversations music wise? Because I've never heard people make that comparison before.
I don't know. I was listening through the Van Halen catalog in preparation for this, and I was like, oh, I hear a lot of at least as far as techniques, a very high gain neck pickup on a Strat, all those kind of things that we associate with the Van Halen sound. AC/DC is doing just a few years later.
I mean,
that could be a mutual respect thing. That could be a parallel thought thing. It could be, a little bit of a mixture of both. But I just couldn't help but notice the parallels. So.
I
think
like
that's an interesting avenue to go down at some point.
Yep, I agree.
Take a hard look
I like
at that
it
because obviously Van Halen, Eddie. He inspired that whole tap technique. Inspired a lot of future players and shredders, from that point on out. But that quickly, could Angus have picked up on that and decided, let me have a go at this, or was it something he was already on to and doing? I don't know. I'd be curious to kind of dig a little bit on that and see.
Yeah, I'm going through both songs in my head right now. So yeah, I can see it. I can definitely see it. And
that's the thing. I can see it. I can totally see it.
And let's be honest, everybody wanted to be that guy, right? Mm-hmm. So at the point that Van Halen came out and Eddie's unique style and techniques came to the forefront, everybody did want to play like him. People were copying him, and I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that prominent bands that were already established tried to mimic his style as well.
Right. Yeah, you definitely see. You would think good musicians recognize a thing, and it's like, how can we cash in on this a little bit? But you have the whole thing where they hit in the late 70s in California, and it was like a bomb drop on the music scene.
Yeah.
You look at interview after interview of people coming out of the shows, and the one thing I remember hearing over and over again, it was these guys just melted my face off. Performance wise, music wise, Eddie's guitar playing. I mean, this whole thrash metal scene starting to come out there in the early 80s, Southern California. I think they had a big impact on part of that as well. So,
yeah, if I had a music time machine, one of the things that I would do is I would go back to LA in like 1977 and go to Whiskey A Go Go and watch Van Halen.
Right.
Yeah, buddy.
I think that would be awesome. That's on my that's on my music time machine list.
Right. And so think of the music scene from that time period. You've had this huge folk movement through the 70s. You've got disco is starting to, it kind of has hit its peak, but then all of a sudden you have Van Halen. And it's like, oh my God, what is this? And it's just totally fresh, totally different. Different from the whole post-punk departure. You've just got, they're doing their own thing, and it's amazing. And I think that's why it just caught fire the way it did. Fantastic musicians with, heck, party hard, play hard, but good night, man.
Yeah.
Great show, great music.
Yeah. But then after 1984, which coincidentally came out in 1984, David Lee Roth left.
Yep.
And somehow thought he could get a better gig. And the crazy thing is, if that weren't dumb enough, the producer that discovered them and produced all of their albums up through 1984, when David Lee Roth left, rather than stick with Van Halen, he went with David Lee Roth. I mean, ultimately he came back a couple of albums later and worked with him again, but gee whiz. you're not paying attention. But Roth didn't like the kind of the darker sounds of some of the later 70s albums, and didn't like the keyboards, and so he's gone, and so now they're in the search for a new lead singer. One of the people that Eddie Van Halen asked to join the band was Daryl Hall. So we almost had Van Halen, but didn't.
Right.
I think I've tried to wrap my head around that many times. What in the world would that sound like? But ultimately settled on Sammy Hagar, who had been lead singer for Montrose and had some success as a solo artist as well. And here the guys are on, or a picture of the guys. I think it's the second album that they did with Hagar. Right. So in terms of compare and contrast, what do you think between the David Lee Roth albums and the Sammy Hagar albums? I won't, fool with the Gary Cherone album.
Can we forget that ever happened? For me personally, I'm totally in the David Lee Roth camp. I mean, the guy's a straight a-hole, but the energy and the vibe and everything, as well as just his vocals that he lends to it, for me, that's what defines Van Halen. I think with Sammy Hagar, there were some good songs.
Mhm.
There's some good songs off of OU812 and the Unlawful Carnal Knowledge album, but they're not, to me, they're not what I remember Van Halen for, and they're not the ones that I come back to listen to either later on. Like I go back to 1984. I go back to Van Halen 1 quite often. I don't really, unless I happen to catch a song on the radio, I don't really ever go to listen to the Hagar version of Van Halen.
Yeah.
And there's some great music. There's some great musicianship going on there, but it took a totally different, a stylistic turn that to me got a little bit more, I almost want to say top 40 pop kind of focused a little bit, just standard rock instead of the melt your face,
Right.
kind of early thrash influence that I knew Van Halen for. So,
yeah, I'm
Drew, what do you
inclined to
think?
agree. I don't have a whole lot to add on that discussion other than, like has already been said, I didn't feel like I was gaining anything with Sammy Hagar. I don't go back to those albums necessarily. Some of his solo stuff prior to joining Van Halen, I thought was great.
yeah,
We talked earlier about the influence of MTV. He had some great early music videos as a solo artist and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, just like Ben said, I think we were kind of just subbing a great for a good. And I don't necessarily feel like that was the right choice. I don't know who would have been better. I don't think Daryl Hall would have been it.
It would have been
Hindsight being
interesting.
what it is. But
It would have been interesting. Yeah.
I'm right there with you, Ben, on all that.
yeah.
I think that there are some really good, some of my favorite Van Halen songs are in the Sammy Hagar era.
Okay.
Finish What You Started, Black and Blue, Run Around, Pound Cake. I think those are great. And there are a lot of songs, if you listen to the Sammy Hagar songs, that you think, okay, like right now, I can't picture David Lee Roth singing that song.
Right.
Yeah. And there are a lot of the early Van Halen things that I'm like, that doesn't fit Sammy Hagar. And if you look at what they did when they toured, they did very, very few of the early Van Halen songs when touring with Sammy Hagar as lead singer.
Right.
And then when David Lee Roth came back, I don't know, late 90s, whenever it was, 96, something like that, they did the old Van Halen stuff. They didn't do the Sammy Hagar era stuff. So it was two very different vocalists, and certainly very different frontmen. In terms of frontmen, David Lee Roth kills Sammy Hagar. It's not even close. I think as a vocalist, Sammy Hagar is better than David Lee Roth, but that wasn't necessarily the importance of the role that David Lee Roth was fulfilling then. So,
Yeah. Definitely
Would it be
not
fair
a plug
to
and
say
play
that?
kind of thing.
Agreed. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but
No, you're good.
would it be fair to say then, Kevin, that you see the transition of vocalists as more of a, hey, this is a chapter. It's not an evolution or devolution. It's just, this is what it was for now. And then we pick up where we left off, and just kind of a different chapter in the life of the band.
I agree. I would agree with that statement. And I think that at that point it was, and probably all along, it was a vehicle for Eddie Van Halen's creativity. I mean, you look at Alex as a drummer. I think he's a good drummer. Yeah. He's not somebody that I'm going to say, okay, he's in my top 10 of all time. Michael Anthony certainly doesn't come across as somebody that was spectacular on the bass. And I think Eddie tried to replace him a number of times throughout the history of the band. And when his son finally got old enough to play with the band, he booted Michael Anthony. But it was just the band was a mechanism for Eddie to be creative musically.
Right.
And David Lee Roth fit that for the time that he was there. And when it no longer fit, they brought in Sammy Hagar, and that fit better for what Eddie was trying to do than what David could have done.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
That's well said.
But eventually Wolfgang did get in the band, and I think played on the last Van Halen album. And David Lee Roth was back as lead singer at that point. But there wasn't anything of that I really enjoyed off that last album. But
so talking about David Lee Roth, how many times was he on and off again with the band? Because I mean, for me, like one of the most memorable reunions was, I think, was it like an MTV award show or something, where he came back on and announced, "We're back together," and then by the time they got backstage, they had done kicked his butt off because he was such a jerk.
Yes.
Like, yeah, we're not doing this anymore. No, we're done.
Yes. And this kind of dates me as well, but it was like when Billy Martin was the manager of the Yankees. George Steinbrenner would hire him and fire him and hire him again and fire him again. Right. And that's kind of the David Lee Roth's tenure as the lead singer for Van Halen. I think that he was in and out of the band 3 or 4 different times. And,
too much ego, man. Too much
ego. Way too much ego.
Yeah.
So there was quite a turnstile after Hagar left.
Right.
And again, what do you think you're going to do, Sammy Hagar? What's going to be better for you and your career and making money and being relevant than being the lead singer of Van Halen? If Eddie says, "Hey, I want to play like this,"
right?
Whatever you say, Eddie, I'm with you.
Right?
Yeah.
But that's just my thoughts. I think he was in a super group called Chickenfoot, and I'm trying to remember who else was in that group. But anyway, I don't think he did a whole lot on his own. But
the coolest thing I can think of with Sammy Hagar of recent is last year during the pandemic, when he put together some live stream performances where he had different artists join him from their homes or studios or whatever, and they all just kind of jammed together. And this was like broadcast live on Facebook and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Especially you're locked down at home, whatever, and tune in and see something. Some musicians come together like that. But that's the last relevant thing I can think of where I thought, this is kind of nice what Sammy Hagar's doing. Beyond that,
yeah. Well, yeah, I thought he had his moment, and his best moment was, in the late '80s, early '90s, and when he was with Van Halen. But Eddie, unfortunately, had dealt with several health issues.
Right.
He had cancer, partly due to his smoking. He said that he attributed some of it to the fact that he would hold guitar picks in his mouth during performances, and he thought that led to the tongue and mouth cancer that he had. But
well, let's talk about that, because he was using, I think he said copper and brass, or copper and nickel or something, some kind of metallic guitar picks, and it's like, I've seen some various different materials used in guitar picks. I'm by no means any kind of advanced guitar player, but the idea of playing at the speeds and with which he does, and obviously that's going to translate to tone and sound, what kind of guitar pick you're using. So I find that deeply intriguing, as well as just thinking of playing with a metallic pick like that. So
yeah, it's very different.
Yeah.
Drew, do you ever use anything like that?
Only if things go very, very wrong and I've lost 3 or 4 picks.
Right.
I've used a penny before, but it was after the pick I brought and the pick that was in my pants pocket both got dropped. So,
Oh no.
yeah.
Penny. Okay, well, that's different.
Happens.
But he, he passed away in 2020, ultimately due to the cancer and a stroke. And Drew, you mentioned his son Wolfgang.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I really respect about what he's done is the name of his band is Mammoth WVH. So Mammoth is kind of the throwback to the pre-Van Halen days of his dad. I mean, he could have just said, "This is Eddie Van Halen's son's album."
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but he didn't. And when I first heard it, I didn't know who it was, and thought, "Oh wow, this is pretty good." And then I dug into it and figured out that it was Wolfgang, and that he plays every instrument on the album,
bit. Yep.
sings every vocal on the album, and I think that's just incredibly impressive for somebody that could have just coasted off his dad's coattails, but decided he wasn't going to do it that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly
that true
impressive.
artistic gene carries.
Yeah. Yep. Really good stuff. Any other thoughts on Van Halen or Eddie?
I just know if I ever hear a Van Halen song on the radio, I never turn it. If I'm listening to something Van Halen comes on, it's usually I'm reaching for the volume to crank it up. Doesn't matter which song it is, honestly.
Yeah.
But even Jump, I'm still tuned in for it.
Yeah.
And they just have that kind of impact. It's absolutely timeless, honestly, as true classic music. And what can you say? It's Eddie freaking Van Halen, man.
Eddie freaking Van Halen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really good stuff. But we will kind of wrap up this show. Hope everybody enjoyed this and kind of the walk down memory lane with Eddie. Raise a glass to Eddie today, and remember the music that he created and the innovation that he was. So before we sign off here, though, Ben, tell us about another bar cart show.
One of the really unique bar cart shows that we have is called the Victorian Bar Room, and that one is hosted by Brian Cushing and Amy Liebert. And Brian is a historian and a mixologist, and he is going through and digging up and reviving and bringing out knowledge of these Victorian era cocktails, which is, if you're into mixology, you understand this time period of the 1800s, especially the Victorian time period, is really the heady point of time for mixology, for cocktails. It's really evolving. It's really becoming a thing. And some of these, the modern cocktails that we enjoy so much now, they really take root there. So he's going back and digging the original recipes. It's, what can I say? Brian lives the life of the Victorian man. He has immersed himself historically in that time period, from the clothes he wears to the goblets and the wine glasses that he's using. He's digging into the really original recipes, and it's just absolutely fascinating. He's going to take you on some wonderful scenery, some wonderful places from that period. Yeah. And he's going to walk you through some fantastic cocktails. And I've made pretty much, I think, every single one of those that he's done so far, and every one of them have been absolutely amazing. The Mississippi Punch has been one of my personal favorites. That one's incredible, but a great show to check out. He's on YouTube. You can follow him on Instagram as well under Notes from the Victorian Man. Just a fantastic human being, and he's got a great show, the Victorian Bar Room. Check it out.
Yeah, he's great and incredibly authentic.
Yes,
in everything that he does with it. It's fascinating stuff. Yep. So Drew, tell us about what we've got coming up next week.
Yeah, thank you again, everybody, for tuning in for our discussion of Jack Daniels and Van Halen. Next week, we are going to be talking some cocktails. I cannot wait to see what these other two guys do. I've got some things in mind as well. And then we're going to be talking about producer extraordinaire, one Mr. Rick Rubin, and the influence that he's had on especially our modern music scene.
Yeah.
So very, very excited for that episode. Make sure and check that out when it comes out next week.
Yeah. That'll be a lot of fun.
Yep.
That can go a lot of different directions. So that'll be
Mhm.
great. That'll be
Right.
great. So, well, as we're closing out here, please like, share, subscribe, leave comments in the Facebook group, on our YouTube page. We will post playlists of some Van Halen for this week's show, just like we do for every show that we do. And hope you've enjoyed the show. Hope you've had a good time. Maybe learned a couple things and been inspired to go back and listen to a little bit of Van Halen yourself. So as we're closing out, on behalf of Ben and Drew and myself, and to Eddie, cheers, love, and free bird.
Cheers.
Cheers. Guys.